Welcome to AskFOI, where we answer the most common questions we receive about prophecy, Israel, and the Bible. With me today is Bruce Scott. Welcome, Bruce.
Shalom, Steve. It's good to be with you.
Bruce, in Exodus 12, we read about Passover, and this was an instruction to the Israelites to observe Passover. But there may be some things that Christians don't know about Passover. What are some things that Christians that aren't very familiar with Passover or how it's celebrated understand about this holiday?
Yes, you're correct. This is a major holiday on the Jewish calendar, and God instructed the Jewish people to observe it every year because it commemorates an historical event where God redeemed them from slavery into freedom. And this was back in the days of Moses and Aaron. Everybody who is familiar with that story knows those main characters and how God had to bring a series of 10 plagues on the land of Egypt because Pharaoh would not let the people go as Moses instructed him to do, and God wanted him to do. Pharaoh hardened his heart and he did not let the people go, and it took 9 plagues for him to experience before on the 10th one he did let the people go. And the 10th one is the basis of the holiday of Passover. What happened was that God said to the people of Israel they were to take an unblemished lamb on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, which became their first month on their religious calendar, set it aside, make sure it was unblemished, and then at the twilight on the 14th day of the month they were to kill it, and they were to take its blood and to smear it on the doorposts and lintels of their homes. And they were to eat it that night with two other elements: bitter herbs and unleavened bread, bread that had no yeast so that it could rise. And the reason why God said this is because the main thing was they were to believe what he said and then apply the blood to their doorposts and lintels. And the key verse in that whole passage is where God says, "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." That night at midnight, he was to pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn of every household, unless they applied the blood of the Lamb. So those who believed God applied the blood. Those who did not believe God did not apply the blood, and they incurred the judgment. So after that, Pharaoh changed his mind and let the people go. So every year, God said, "You are to remember this and observe this wonderful holiday of redemption." That's the theme. In order to help Jewish people today to remember it, they read through a little booklet called a Passover Haggadah. And if you were to read through this and go through the whole booklet with the meal that is set in the middle of it, of the whole narrative, it would take you somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. So some Jewish families, they'll read maybe the first part and have the meal, don't go the rest. Others that are more observant, they'll go through the whole Passover Haggadah, and they will tell the story of the Exodus. And in order to tell the story, as they're reading, they will also have certain food elements on a plate called a Passover seder plate, and they will have this on their table. And the various elements, today, some have been added, such as an egg, a hard boiled egg, or roasted egg. There's parsley, there's lettuce, um, and there is there are 4 cups that were not present during the time of the original Passover. So they'll each person will have a special cup in which during the evening seder, which means order, the order of service, they will drink 4 times from this. Each one of these 4 cups represents a promise that God gave in Exodus chapter 6, where he says, "I will do this for Israel, I will do that," etc. So they'll drink that cup. But they'll also have another big cup on the table called the cup for the prophet Elijah, because they believed that the prophet Elijah is to come, according to the prophet Malachi. He's to come before the coming of the Messiah to announce the arrival of the Messiah. And many Jewish people think that the Messiah will come around Passover time or Yom Kippur. But the 3 major elements um, of the table that were there originally are bitter herbs, which today A lot of Jewish people will eat horseradish, and it's supposed to bring tears to the eyes. So you can't have the creamy type of horseradish. You gotta get the real stuff. And when you take a bite of that during the Seder, it does bring tears to the eyes because you're supposed to remember that this was a time of sorrow, being a slave in Egypt. And then the second element that was present originally was unleavened bread. Today they'll put it in a special pouch that has three parts to it, and in each one there is a matzah cracker. A matzah cracker is just a piece of unleavened bread today that they'll eat at this time because Passover is also connected to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So they will begin with the Passover meal in modern times, and then they'll have a week of unleavened bread where they will not eat any bread products that has any yeast in it, only that which is unleavened. So they'll have the matzah. And then back in biblical days, they would go to the temple and sacrifice the Passover lamb as well. There was only one time when they had to apply the blood. They never did that ever since. It was always a memorial looking back to redemption. But in biblical days, they would go to the temple, sacrifice the Passover lamb. But today, since there's no temple, they don't sacrifice the lamb. Instead, what they'll have on the table is a bone, a shank bone of a lamb to remember that sacrifice of the Passover lamb. What's interesting about the Passover Seder today also is that right after the meal, which is in the middle of the Passover Seder, they will have the children go look for a special piece of matzah called the afikomen. The afikomen is a piece of matzah that's been broken, wrapped up in a cloth that the papa has inserted earlier and has hidden somewhere in the house, so that when the children find the afikomen, they bring it back to the papa. He'll give them a gift, a reward. And what's interesting about this is that this was not in the original Passover, and it wasn't even during the time of the Second Temple. It was added later. And some think that this tradition was added by Jewish believers in Jesus as the Messiah, because the word afikomen is the only Greek word in the Passover Seder, and it means I arrived or I came. So similar to Jesus, he was broken, hidden away for 3 days in the tomb, and he resurrected. And those who find him, if you will, receive the free gift of eternal life. So Passover is a wonderful holiday, and it is the theme of it is the theme of redemption.
That's really beautiful. I have a follow-up question that we should take a minute to answer because I get this one a lot. We see on our calendar that sometimes Passover coincides with Easter. Other times it's weeks away on either side. So we don't celebrate Easter on the same, it's not like Thanksgiving where it's a certain Thursday in the month. So Easter moves. Why is it that Passover and Easter don't coincide every year?
Well, that's a good question, and the answer is rather sad. And the answer is that back in the fourth century, Emperor Constantine, the emperor of the Roman Empire, decided to have a church council. So church leaders from around the area at that time came, and during that church council, they made the decision, and Constantine in particular made the decision to separate the celebration of Passover and the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. And the main reason why he did that is because he wanted to make sure that the church did not have any association with the Jewish people. He didn't want to have any type of influence of Judaism into Christian doctrine. Now, that's unfortunate because the whole story of Christ's death and resurrection is based in the Passover and also grounded in biblical teachings. But because Constantine wanted to separate from the Jewish community, he decided that it would be based on a different time of year. It all has to do with the lunar calendar and the equinox and all of that. So that's why there's a difference in the calendar.
That's really insightful. Thank you so much for your time, Bruce.
Thank you, Steve.